Hi, this is Will Stewart from OnlineChessLessons.net, and today I'm going to be presenting a game from the 24th Magistral Ciudad de Leon. It's a exhibition match between the number one Spanish player, Alexei Shirov, I believe originally from Latvia, and the current world champion, Viswanathan Anand, who is rated about 28-17 these days. So Shirov is outrated by about 100 points, but he is an ever-dangerous player and extremely creative, so I really enjoy watching his game. So he opens with e4 here. Of note, the time control is 40 minutes with an increment of 30 seconds per move. So Anand he plays the Caro-Kann here. He has another World Championship defense coming up in 2012, which will be against Boris Gelfand, the winner of the recently finished 2011 candidates matches in Kazan, Russia. And so Anand is, as he's got to defend the world title next year, he's probably going to stay away from his top-notch theoretical preparation in this match. He doesn't want to give his hand away here. So Anand is playing the Caro-Kann, and with e5, now bishop f5 and knight f3. So after e6 and bishop e2, this has been a very topical variation of late, especially with the Super GM 2700 plus crowd, as white is angling to make matters extremely complicated out of the opening. And on the flip side, the Caro-Kann has been traditionally a kind of a drawish opening. Capablanca used to say he could draw anybody in the world easily with black with it, but of late it's been quite dynamically used. Comes to mind, Nakamura has played it very creatively, so among other top GMs. So with c5, black is aiming to open the position rather quickly, and he's trying to figure out where to put this knight. Is it knight ec6 or knight to g6? Either way. Possibly h6, the bishop's going to go back, and the knight's going to come to f5. So c5 is kind of putting the question to white, and he takes the pawn. Other moves that have been played here, I saw knight a3 in the database. I've also seen the immediate c4. They lead to pretty double-edged positions as well. So after c5, Shirov takes it, which seems to be more or less a pretty complicated move. But I think in the 2700 plus crowd, it's been analyzed pretty well. So now after c4, I believe d4 is the principled continuation by black. But Shirov, he just took the pawn, and after knight ec6, he played bishop g5, so a little deviation there. I believe this isn't quite so thoroughly analyzed. And so the point of bishop g5 is just kind of asking, well, where's the black queen going to go? If it goes to c7 or a5, white is probably going to immediately open the position with c4 as he does in the game. And so bishop to e7, black is trying to neutralize this aggressively placed bishop by white on g5, and trading some pieces will make his defensive task a little bit easier as he has slightly less space by white, specifically due to the wedge, the pawn on e5 that white has, restricting black's pieces a little bit. So after queen takes e7 and now c4, busting open the center. It should also be said with respect to match strategy that Anand is very dangerous with either color, but especially with white. And so, for him to draw games with black is kind of in accordance with his match strategy. It's not bad to draw with black because he's going to have, if he draws every game with black, it's like he's got a free hand to try to press for the win with white. So playing c2 to c4, simply trying to bust open the center and to dismantle black's stronghold on the light squares. So black takes definitely seems like the best move there. And now knight to a3 by white. So he's, wants to put a little pressure on the pawn and maybe transfer this knight to that d6 square. It certainly seems like a good place to put the knight. So after c3 and, moves like b3, they just don't quite work to try to keep the pawn structure intact for white. Just doesn't really cut it. The rook's going to come and try to round it up, but it just wastes too much time, so it's not a good idea. So here white takes, and so knight to d7. No rush to try to round up this c5 pawn because it's better for black to finish his development and get his king out of the center, especially as Shirov is pretty infamous attacker, a very creative player. So knight to b5, obviously introducing knight to c7 check, and more importantly and realistically, knight to d6. So now after castles, knight to d6, no surprise there, putting a little pressure on the bishop on f5, also a little pressure on b7. So here, Anand took on c5. And I thought maybe a more aggressive continuation, I don't see a forced advantage for white, was to play knight d takes e5. And so, in this position, there's a couple different ideas for white. One of the most aggressive that I saw was to play knight takes, and maybe this is what Anand was scared of and why he didn't do it after takes. But it seems like, I don't know, maybe there's a couple holes in this line. And after g4, now bishop g6 and f5. And it seems like white is just going to win a piece here. It's a very crazy line, but I don't really see, possibly queen e3 check, and after king h1, queen takes c5. And I guess this is extremely complicated and very risky. And so this is a tough decision for black to make. So maybe he's going to recoup the pawn, but recoup the piece, rather. But it seems like this is to white's advantage due to threats like knight takes b7. So going back to the game continuation, I'm guessing Anand just wanted to avoid any type of crazy complications like that, and it didn't seem to work out too favorably. So he didn't pause too long to think here, and just played the simple knight takes c5. Seems to achieve equality rather easily, and the pawn on c3 is always going to be weak for white. So bishop b5, trying to put a little pressure on that knight on c6, and also defend his pawn on e5. So immediately, Anand responded with bishop g4, setting up a pin, and also maybe putting a little more pressure on the pawn on e5. So bishop takes c6, and now h3. So putting the question to the bishop, is it going to take on f3 or go back? And so after bishop takes f3, queen takes, white has a very comfortable position as his knight is very secure on d6. He's also got a little threat on the pawn on c6, and maybe some ideas of a kingside attack. So instead, Anand played bishop h5, maintaining the pin, and kind of tying the white queen down. So Shirov immediately plays g4 after 2 minutes of thought there, 2 or 3 minutes. So now bishop to g6 and queen to d4. So nice centralization, and seems to be the only real move worth considering. Knight to b7. Knight d3 is a possibility, but it seems rather risky, and there's a lot of tactical ideas hanging in the air. It just simply does not work. Even the simple maybe rook to d1 is an idea. It's a little too overextended. So the knight goes back to b7, very realistic, trying to trade off white's best piece on d6. So rook to d1 and c5, so getting a little breathing room for the black pieces. And possibly, I don't know. It seems to me maybe knight takes b7, queen takes, and maybe some ideas of queen to c5, but it just doesn't quite work. This is stuff I would want to do as white, but black can simply trade it off, and his bishop is going to be centralized. So white, he's got to play logically and just reinforce the center. c5, and now queen to a4. I was also thinking queen to f4 was a good idea. Shirov is, committed a weakness on his king side by pushing the pawn to g4. So why not put the queen over there and try to maybe play h4 and h5, something like that, try to put some pressure. But he chose queen to a4. So after that, knight takes, and many amateurs would play e takes d6. But I think this pawn is going to be proven much more of a weakness than a strength. I think it's just rounded up and will be taken by black. Simply queen to b7, for example, and the bishop's going to reroute. Black is going to control this diagonally excellently, and white's probably just going to lose the pawn on d6. So it's just not going to work. So Shirov opts for piece play here. Rook takes d6, and now f5 by Anand. He played this move after almost three minutes of thought here. And f5 is simply, obviously, e takes f6 doesn't work on passant there, as queen can take d6. And it's going to, the move f5 really is going to open up the position a little more for black's bishop, as well as, and more importantly, loosen up these kingside pawns by white. This g4 is extremely weak, and so f5, that's the idea, is to really loosen that up. So rook d7, queen e8. And now, white's got some good activity, but he's got a very weak king side. His king is very lonely. So now here, after f takes g4, queen takes g4 is forced, as the rook is threatening the knight on f3. So now rook f7, just trading off the activity, the active rooks by white. And in this position, it's pretty equal. I mean, white has a slight pull on this pawn on e6. He's got some active pieces. But his king is too weak, and black also has a nice bishop for playing on opposite sides of the board. So after takes and rook d7 here, white does have an active rook, but I think the bishop by black is going to compensate. So rook f8, and both players about 10 minutes here. So h6, this is just leading to a drawn endgame. This is a very drawn. There's no way to win this. So after rook a6, Shirov is trying to push a little bit, but rook f3 is definitely the better move there. I didn't really like rook e4. For basically, I mean, e6 is going to leave white with a little bit more pull, but it should still be drawn. So instead he played rook f3 and a couple more moves, but e6. And now the rook's got to come back and defend. And there's no way to break through for black here. I mean, any attempt by white to win is just going to backfire. If rook to c7, rook takes. And now still should be a drawn position, but it looks like black might even have the edge with the connected pass pawns. So in this position, Shirov, he thought for a few minutes on maybe trying to push a little harder for a win, but he decided to take a repetition here, and a draw was agreed. So a nice game by Shirov. He was trying to push. I was hoping for a little bit more complications, but Anand is extremely experienced at 41 years old. I believe a 4-time.